Okay, I'm back, and so now we're up to about 540 million years ago. And so there's a very good animation that I want you to be watching as we go through the remainder of the slides. So get on the internet and find plate tectonics 540 million years, modern world, Scott's animation. So find that on YouTube. Okay, and then what I'm going to have you do is you're going to be playing the animation, which is going to be showing all the continents moving around, and then I'm going to have you pause it at certain key times, and then we're going to examine what did the Earth look like at that time period. Okay, so let's start off with the Cambrian period, which is between 544 and 490 million years ago. And so on our cosmic calendar, this corresponds to between November the 17th and the 22nd. So if you want to start playing the video, and then you can stop it when it gets to about 520 million years ago. So that's that's in the middle of the Cambrian period. Okay, and then on this picture here, you might notice that there's a red dot on one of those continents. That red dot is the location of OTC. So that's where OTC in the state of Missouri in North America would be located at during this time period. So for those my students at OTC, keep your eye on the red dot, and it shows what Missouri was like. And you will notice that sometimes the continent is going to be completely out of the water, and then sometimes the continent is going to be covered by water. And so we think that this has something to do with a mid-ocean ridge. So if you recall, at a mid-ocean ridge, the ground does this, and then you've got volcanoes that are coming out like that. Well, you can see that that raises the ground, and then the water that used to be on top of it's got to go somewhere. So we think that whenever you have a lot of mid-ocean ridge activity, then the water kind of sloshes onto the continental shelves when that occurs. All right, so let's take a look at what's happening in the oceans. You notice that I'm not talking about the land, because there still is nothing on the land at this point, because the ozone layer, now it's starting at this point, so there's enough oxygen in the atmosphere being produced by algae and other photosynthetic organisms that the ozone layer is beginning to form. So that shield against ultraviolet radiation is getting stronger and stronger. But at this point, it's still too weak to keep out the ultraviolet, and so if there was any organisms on land, they probably would be killed by the ultraviolet light. So what does that leave us with? So in the oceans that existed during the Cambrian period, you would have the first trilobites, and a trilobite is kind of like a roly-poly. So it's an organism that has multiple plates on it, kind of like this, and then it's got legs that stick out like that on both sides, and then it's got antenna. And so some of these things could swim, and then some of them could crawl on the bottom of the ocean floor. Okay, and then you're going to have also your first major predators of these things. And so if you look in that picture there at the bottom, you will see a thing that kind of looks like a shrimp, and it's got two tusks that come out of its face, and then it could use those tusks to grab these trilobites that were crawling around on the ocean floor. So this would have been the apex predator that would have existed 540 million years ago. And so these things would have been, maybe 1 meter in length or 3 feet in length. And you also have your first shelled organisms. So that means that the ocean is absorbing carbon dioxide and converting it into calcite. And then you also have your first sponges are developing. Okay, so let's go to our next slide, which is going to be the Ordovician. So the Ordovician period lasts from 490 to 441 million years ago. So go ahead and hit the play button and let it go until it's about 460 million years. Okay, so still at this point nothing really spectacular is happening. You'll notice that North America is moving around. It's in the temperate zone right now. So part of it is getting into the tropics. And you'll notice that most of North America is covered up by water at this point. Okay, and then the first crinoids. So we haven't talked about crinoids that much, but crinoids are an animal, so they're not a flower, and they have calcium carbonate that they make that they protect their bodies with, and then they have a stalk that they anchor to the bottom of the ocean, and then they have these things. They're going to have tentacles that come out of the head, and then the tentacles are filtering the ocean water for food. And so that's what a crinoid is. It's very similar to a sea star. And what happens though is these things were near the shore, so when they die, the waves pound on them and break them all apart, and then those parts get glued together, and then that makes up a lot of the rocks that we find here in southern Missouri. You have the first jawless fish. Okay, so it's a fish. It has fins, but it doesn't have jaws at this point. The first nautiloids. So a nautiloid is going to be kind of like a squid, but notice what has it got? It has a shell. So why do you think that modern squids, they don't have a shell? So there's always going to be a trade-off between speed and protection. So at this point, these nautiloids thought it was a better idea to have protection. So they had a very large shell that would surround their body, and then their tentacles would come out of the shell. You also have the first euryptids. So these are going to be like scorpion-like organisms that would be able to crawl onto land. And as they would crawl onto land, they would lay their eggs, and then they would go back into the ocean. So these scorpion-like creatures were called euryptids. You also have the first plants to get onto land. So the first non-vascular plants, such as mosses and lichens. So notice, where do we find moss today? Where do we find lichens today? So they like very moist environments. So the first kinds of plants that could have existed out of the ocean had to be near the water in order to be able to survive. And the same thing with the animals. So everything was staying very close to the shoreline. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to, oh, by the way, Ordovician. So Ordovician for us in Missouri is very important. Branson. So Branson, Missouri is on top of rocks that are Ordovician in age. Okay, So, when we come back, we're going to discuss the Silurian period and what happened during it.